It all started with a phone call. In the quiet stillness of a hot West African afternoon, President Ibrahim TRAORÉ sat alone in his office. The hum of the ceiling fan droned softly overhead, slicing through the heavy air as sunlight spilled across a wall lined with regional maps and military updates. Despite the heat, the room was calm, almost meditative. That is, until the red phone on his desk lit up. He picked it up, expecting perhaps an update from the Defense Ministry, but the voice on the other end wasn't from any general. It was American, polished, media-trained. President TRAORÉ. The man said, "This is Richard Stone, executive producer at Fox News. We'd like to invite you to a special live debate on U.S. Africa counter-terrorism strategy." Ibrahim said nothing for a moment. Then he leaned back in his chair. "And who would I be debating?" he asked. His tone steady. "Dana Whitmore," the voice replied, "former Attorney General of Florida." Now that name, he recognized. Whitmore was a seasoned prosecutor with a sharp tongue and a history of throwing political punches on national television. She wasn't just experienced, she was dangerous. TRAORÉ had seen her before. In viral clips and hard-edged interviews, she didn't just question, she dismantled. Richard continued. "The focus will be security cooperation in the Sahel. Challenges. Accountability. Progress. We think your perspective would be enlightening." Ibrahim's lips curled into the faintest smile. "Very well," he said. "Let the world hear both sides." But while the invitation seemed cordial, thousands of miles away in the marble halls of Washington, D.C., a very different conversation was unfolding. Senator Charles Banning was already on the move, a veteran of backroom deals and media manipulation. Banning didn't believe in coincidence. He believed in control. He had watched TRAORÉs with quiet confidence, gaining respect, not just in Africa, but increasingly in Western policy circles. That made him dangerous. That made him inconvenient. So, in a private call to Fox executives, Banning laid out the rules of engagement. "Push him," he said. "Don't let him come across as polished. We don't want a summit, we want a storm." By the next morning, changes had already begun. Tucker Carlson, once slated to moderate, was quietly replaced by Bradley Gaines, a younger, hungrier host with a clean face and a flexible spine. This wasn't going to be a debate. It was going to be a trap. Everyone in D.C. knew it except, perhaps, the man in Ouagadougou who had accepted the invitation without hesitation. But Ibrahim TRAORÉ wasn't walking in blind. He never did. While others played to win the moment, he prepared for the long game. And he didn't raise his voice to be heard. He let facts do the talking. Still, none of that would matter if the audience never heard him clearly. That's why the setup was so important. A split screen, one studio in Washington, one war room in West Africa, and a broadcast reaching millions. On paper, it was a diplomatic discussion. In reality, it was the opening move in a televised chess match, where one side thought they held the board, but the other had already memorized the endgame. While the world saw a polite invitation to discuss international security, behind closed doors, preparations told a different story. This wasn't going to be a dialogue, it was a collision. And both sides were quietly gearing up for war. In Washington, D.C., just 2 blocks from Capitol Hill, The windows of Dana Whitmore's private office remained shut. The spring sun blazed outside. But inside, the air was cold, held hostage by ambition. Dana stood in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting her cream-colored blazer like armor. At 52, she still had the piercing posture of a courtroom veteran. Her jaw was set, her tone clipped, her eyes unblinking. She had faced drug cartels, prosecuted organized crime, and debated governors live on air. But this time, her opponent wasn't a defendant. He was a president. Across the room, her longtime aide, Julia McKenna, tapped swiftly on a tablet. Security memos, intelligence talking points, media prep, it was all there. But the atmosphere shifted when Leo Sanderson entered the room. Leo wasn't like the others. A young data analyst from the National Intelligence Review Office. He didn't care for politics. He cared for patterns, numbers, timelines. And this debate had plenty of them. He claims to have reduced terrorist attacks by 72% over 3 years. Dana said, flipping through a printout, that number smells like propaganda. Probably based on interviews with rebel sympathizers and goat herders. Leo hesitated. That's the official UN field report. He replied quietly. Satellite confirmed. Ground verified. Dana barely looked up. I need data that casts doubt. Civilian complaints. Intelligence gaps. Anything unvetted. If he's built an image, I want to see what cracks it. Leo exchanged a glance with Julia, then reluctantly pulled up a new file, an anonymous drop that hadn't gone through official clearance. This just came in yesterday. He said, unverified but detailed. Civilian raids. Disappearances. Excess force reports. Even some leaked memos in French. Dana's eyes lit up. Anonymous, yes. But useful very. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the file came from Michael Lennox, a former State Department contractor now operating from the shadows. And more importantly, a mole for Senator Charles Banning. Banning didn't need the truth. He needed a distraction. Just enough smoke to blur the outlines of reality. Just enough doubt to question everything else. Across town, in a private suite overlooking the Potomac, Banning poured himself a bourbon and whispered into a secure line. Let Whitmore breathe fire. Let Gaines guide the flame. But don't let TRAORÉ shine too bright. Dana, unaware she was part of a larger game, continued rehearsing. Bradley Gaines will need to set me up, she said to Julia. Not an attack. Just bait. I'll take care of the rest live. Julia nodded. But even she flinched when Dana added, he's not the savior they think he is. He's just another opportunist with good PR. Thousands of miles away. Rain clouds gathered over Ouagadougou. Inside the presidential compound, Ibrahim TRAORÉ sat with Defense Minister Colonel Marcus Dio and Foreign Affairs Minister Dr. Aylins Widogo. A digital projector displayed maps, charts, and verified statistics, hard data, not propaganda. Civilian casualties down 81%. Militant control cut by nearly 3/4. Villages once ruled by fear now had schools, clinics, and food. But Ibrahim wasn't impressed by numbers. He folded his hands and said quietly, tomorrow, I'm not defending myself. I'm defending what Africa can achieve when it is no longer told who it must be. Doctor, Widogo nodded. She will come armed with headlines, mistranslations, old interviews. Let her. Ibrahim said. Unmoved. The truth doesn't change with accent or audience. Colonel Dio tapped a final slide. Private U.S. Defense briefings quietly praising Burkina Faso's operations. Ironically, he smirked. Some of her colleagues trust our results more than she does. But Ibrahim didn't smile. He closed the folder, looked at his ministers, and said with calm certainty, "This isn't just a debate. It's a trial. And I intend to put the system itself on the witness stand." The lights inside the Fox News studio weren't just bright, they were surgical, cold, calculated. Everything about the set was designed to shape perception. The background lighting, the distance between chairs, even the camera angles. This wasn't just television, it was theater. Dana Whitmore sat poised in a cream-colored blazer that seemed to gleam under the studio glow. Her back was straight, her hands folded perfectly in her lap. She was every bit the legal gladiator polished. Confident, unyielding. Opposite her, on a split screen beamed in from West Africa, sat President Ibrahim Traoré. No tie, no media coaching. Just a dark suit and a calm presence. Behind him a modest office, 2 national flags, and a wall of regional maps. It wasn't a power display. It was quiet intent. The moderator, Bradley Gaines, flashed a professional smile as the cameras went live. "Good evening, America," he said. "Tonight, we welcome former Florida Attorney General Dana Whitmore, an expert on organized crime, and, joining us from Burkina Faso, President Ibrahim Traoré, a rising figure in African security affairs." His tone lingered just long enough to plant an idea. One guest was a legal authority, the other, a distant curiosity. Dana spoke first, her voice sharp, composed, familiar. "Let's be clear. Bradley, I've gone toe-to-toe with cartels, dismantled trafficking networks, and prosecuted terrorists. I didn't come here to be lectured by a politician from a region still figuring out which end of a crisis to hold." She let the words hang. It wasn't just confidence. It was condescension. Polished and precise. Ibrahim didn't blink. "Madam Whitmore," he began, voice low and measured. "I respect your experience. But leadership isn't measured by age or geography. It's measured by results. In Burkina Faso, we've reduced terrorist attacks by 72% in the past 3 years. That didn't happen with slogans. It came from strategy, sacrifice, and people." Dana's jaw flexed. 70%, she repeated, smirking. "Those numbers are charming. But let's be honest. Data out of West Africa doesn't exactly come with transparency." Ibrahim remained still. Transparency, by whose standards? Dana cut in. "Here, tone tightening. You don't have the infrastructure, the oversight, or the intelligence capabilities we have in the United States. And when it comes to counterterrorism, I doubt you've seen half of what I've seen." There was a pause. Then, Ibrahim leaned forward, ever so slightly, not in aggression, but with deliberate calm. "Our threats are not theoretical. Madam, our people don't debate terror from behind a podium. They live it. They rebuild from it. They bury their dead and keep going." The weight of his words slowed the room. "But," he added, Since we're discussing oversight, perhaps we should also discuss yours. Bradley's head turned slightly off script already. Dana narrowed her eyes. As Florida's Attorney General, Ibrahim said, "You opened an investigation into Trump University. That investigation was quietly closed shortly after your PAC received a $25 donation from Donald Trump." Silence. Dana blinked. "Excuse me, the timeline is public," Ibrahim said softly. Investigation launched. Donation received. Investigation closed. I'm not speculating. These are your own country's records. Bradley shifted uncomfortably. President TRAORÉ, are you implying corruption? I'm not implying anything. Ibrahim replied. I'm answering questions about transparency with your own facts. Dana's voice cracked as she snapped back. This is a smear. It's got nothing to do with terrorism. It has everything to do with credibility. Ibrahim said, his tone steady. You've questioned mine. I'm simply inviting the audience to consider yours. And just like that, the energy changed. What was meant to be a takedown had tilted on its axis. Dana arrived with pre-written soundbites. But Ibrahim came with something stronger: receipts. The debate had begun, but the balance of power had already shifted. For a few moments, the studio was silent. Not because someone missed their cue, but because something fundamental had shifted. The tone, the momentum, the very purpose of the broadcast. Dana Whitmore, once poised and unshakable, now sat forward. Her hands clenched too tightly. Her smile too forced. What was supposed to be a confident takedown had become a battle of credibility, and she was losing ground fast. I didn't come here to be ambushed by a foreign leader, looking to score points on American politics, she snapped. And I didn't come here to be dismissed by someone who mistakes volume for virtue. Ibrahim responded, calm as ever. You challenged my legitimacy. I only asked that you defend yours. Then he paused and clicked a remote. The screen behind him changed. Now, visible to millions watching at home, was a scanned copy of an official document, a public filing from the Florida State Ethics Commission. Highlighted in yellow was a $25 donation from Donald Trump's foundation to Dana Whitmore's political committee. Just below it, another line. Investigation closed 2 weeks later. Ibrahim didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked into the camera. This document, he said, isn't from Burkina Faso. It's not from any foreign entity. It's from your own state records. Dana's jaw tightened. That's misleading, she said quickly. Taken out of context. It's a smear tactic. No, madam, Ibrahim replied gently. It's a timeline. Money entered. Justice excited. Dana leaned toward the camera, her voice rising now. You're diverting from the real issues, from your country's failures. I'm planting facts, Ibrahim said simply, and letting the audience decide which roots run deeper. Bradley Gaines, the host, cleared his throat nervously, trying to shift the conversation. Let's return to counterterrorism, but the moment was already gone. The story had rewritten itself. Live. Then came the second blow. Ibrahim raised his hand slightly. The screen shifted again. This time, it displayed a series of financial transactions, wire transfers, from a pharmaceutical lobbying group to a private consulting firm, registered under Dana Whitmore's name. $000 a month. 12 payments. all after her time in office. Following your resignation, Ibrahim said, you received over $100,000 per month from pharmaceutical interests. In return, your firm publicly advocated for pricing models that raised costs for consumers. That's a lie. Dana snapped. Louder now. Those were legal contracts. Standard advisory roles. Perhaps, Ibrahim said softly. But not everyone who holds a legal contract holds moral clarity. The room went quiet again. Dana's posture shifted. Her voice grew sharper, angrier. I don't need to be lectured by someone from a country where democracy barely exists. The words spilled out before she could stop them. And then, they just hung. Bradley's mouth fell open. The control room froze. In living rooms across America, the silence was deafening. Ibrahim didn't raise his voice. He didn't react with anger. He simply said, you've just told the world everything it needs to know about your brand of justice. When facts fail you, you reach for prejudice. Dana tried to recover. I'm not racist, she muttered. I didn't mean it that way. I never said you were. Ibrahim replied, but your words did. The debate was no longer about terrorism, or strategy, or numbers. It had become a mirror, and one side no longer liked what it saw. The studio air had turned cold. Not because of temperature, but because something deeper had entered the space exposure. The kind you can't walk back. The kind that changes the room. Dana Whitmore sat frozen. Her earlier composure now replaced by clenched hands and a pale expression. The moment she let those words slip, words laced with arrogance, and something uglier, the energy had collapsed around her. But Ibrahim TRAORÉ wasn't finished. He clicked the remote again. This time, what appeared behind him wasn't a graph or statistic, it was a sound wave. A simple audio waveform, pulsing softly on the screen. Then, a voice played. It wasn't Ibrahim's. It wasn't Dana's. It was a man. American. Confident. Cold. Look, Dana. Americans don't care about Burkina Faso or Mali. They hear African president, and they already tune out. You don't have to win. Just push him. Cut his numbers on air. Make him look unsure. The studio gasped. Even Bradley Gaines looked like someone had knocked the air out of him. Because the voice, it was unmistakably Senator Charles Banning. Clipped. Precise. Calculated. A man who had spent his career pulling strings behind the scenes, now caught speaking without a filter. Ibrahim didn't flinch. What you just heard, he said softly, was not a conversation about policy. It was a strategy of sabotage, not against me, but against the very idea that someone like me could speak as an equal. The screen shifted again. Now screenshots of email threads. Between Michael Lennox, Dana's source of anonymous intelligence, and a staffer from Senator Banning's office. Subject line, Counterintel assets for Thursday. Attached the same flawed documents Dana had quoted earlier in the broadcast. Same false allegations. Same manipulated data. Now proven to be part of a deliberate campaign. A trap. But it wasn't TRAORÉ who had stepped into it. It was the system. And it was unraveling live. Bradley's voice cracked as he tried to regain footing. President TRAORÉ, would you consider this a political attack against your administration? Ibrahim looked directly into the lens. No, he said plainly. This isn't politics. This is exposure. Then he paused just long enough for the weight to land. I did not come here to trade insults. He said, I came to speak truth. And truth is not a weapon, it is a mirror. If it wounds, it's because someone no longer recognizes the face looking back. In the control room, no one moved. No one breathed. Even Dana Whitmore, who had once owned every room she entered now, sat like a statue. Her power wasn't taken from her. It had collapsed under the weight of her own record. And still, Ibrahim spoke with no anger. No mockery. Just clarity. This was never about one debate. It was never even about me. It was about a belief deeply rooted and carefully protected that leadership must sound a certain way. I look a certain way. Come from a certain place. He let that hang. But tonight, that illusion has cracked. And what's behind it is fear. Fear that the world is changing. That it's finding its voice and no longer asking for permission. The screen faded to black. Not with music. Not with applause. Just silence. And a truth that didn't need to shout because it had already been heard. By the time the studio lights dimmed, the world had already changed. The final few minutes of the debate, Dana Whitmore's outburst, the leaked recordings, and Ibrahim Traoré's calm dismantling of it all were clipped, subtitled, and uploaded across every major social media platform before the closing credits even rolled. On Twitter, hashtags exploded. Number. Whitmore meltdown. Number. TRAORÉ truth number. When facts speak. Within 20 minutes. They were trending globally. TikTok flooded with reactions. Law students replayed the segment frame by frame. Journalists sat stunned in newsrooms, scrapping their pre-written commentary and rewriting headlines on the fly. Veterans of political media whispered to each other, "We've never seen anything like this." Facebook timelines filled with clips shared not just by activists or academics, but by school teachers, veterans, and church leaders. A 70-year-old grandmother in Alabama posted it with a caption that simply read, "That man didn't raise his voice, but he raised a mirror." By the next morning, the shockwaves were tangible. 3 of Dana Whitmore's corporate clients quietly severed ties. A pharmaceutical company canceled her $1.8 million speaking engagement. A law firm that once bragged about her as a board advisor removed her profile overnight. And the damage wasn't just reputational. It was existential. The shield of untouchability she had worn for decades, polished by connections, strengthened by media, had cracked in front of millions. And the more she tried to defend herself, the more it slipped through her fingers. In Washington, Senator Charles Banning was no longer taking calls. The Ethics Committee issued a formal statement announcing an internal review into his alleged coordination with media producers and third-party contractors. The statement didn't mention names, but everyone already knew. Banning's allies began to distance themselves quietly, carefully, like stepping back from a structure that had already begun to collapse. Inside Capitol Hill hallways, aides whispered what no one had dared say publicly before. "It's not if he resigns, it's when." But while Washington scrambled, Ouagadougou remained calm. Inside the presidential compound, President Traoré didn't celebrate. There were no press conferences, no victory laps. He sat with his advisors in a sunlit room, quietly reviewing the transcripts. His phone buzzed. A message from the U.S. Department of Defense. A formal invitation to present Burkina Faso's counterterrorism model in person at the Pentagon. The message was short, respectful, equal. An hour later, another message arrived. This time from the United Nations. President Ibrahim Traoré, had been unanimously appointed as Special Advisor on Regional Security for West Africa. No lobbying, no campaign, just acknowledgement. Still, Ibrahim didn't toast or smile. Instead, he walked to the balcony alone. Looking out over a city he had nearly given his life to defend. Beneath him, the streets of Ouagadougou stirred quietly, children walking to school, markets opening, flags waving gently in the breeze. And as he stood there, the final image of the broadcast replayed in the minds of millions, not Dana's collapse, not the audio recordings, but Ibrahim TRAORÉ, looking directly into the camera. No filter, no theater, just a man telling the truth. And as the screen faded to black, no words were needed, only silence, the kind that doesn't follow chaos but revelation. What we witnessed wasn't just a debate gone wrong. It was a turning point, and not the kind marked by applause or sound bites, but by silence, the kind of silence that follows something irreversible. A mirror held up in real time, revealing not just individuals, but an entire system laid bare. Dana Whitmore didn't fall because of one mistake. She collapsed under the weight of something far heavier: entitlement. Years of unchecked confidence. A career polished by connections and shielded by reputation. And perhaps most dangerous of all, the belief that no one would ever challenge her. But someone did. And he didn't yell. He didn't insult. He didn't even interrupt. Ibrahim TRAORÉ let the facts speak. He let the audience decide. He understood that real power isn't volume. It's restraint. And in that moment, his calm became louder than any accusation ever could. He showed us something we rarely see on television. Not political victory, but moral clarity. He reminded the world that dignity is not reserved for the powerful. It's owned by those who stand in truth, especially when the world expects them to stay silent. Because let's be honest, this wasn't just about two people on a screen. It was about a pattern. For years, voices from the global South have been expected to defend themselves twice as hard, explain themselves twice as clearly, and ask twice as nicely just to be heard. But Ibrahim TRAORÉ didn't ask to be heard. He simply spoke. And in doing so, he forced the rest of us to listen. His words didn't attack. They revealed. His evidence didn't smear. It confirmed. And his final message, quiet, unwavering, wasn't a threat to power. It was a challenge to conscience. Because what do you do when truth comes, not from where you expect it, but from where you've been trained to overlook? What happens when a man you were told to dismiss turns out to be the one holding the receipts? And what does it say about us if we only respect truth when it comes wrapped in the papas, right accent, the right suit, the right skin? This story didn't end in applause. It ended in accountability. Dana's downfall wasn't orchestrated. It was revealed. Banning silence wasn't forced. It was earned. And the world's response wasn't shock. It was recognition of a truth we've all seen, but rarely acknowledged. So what now? Do we scroll past this moment? Do we let it fade like another headline? Or do we carry it forward? Because this wasn't just about Ibrahim TRAORÉ. It was about something bigger. It was about what happens when someone calmly, deliberately, and unapologetically tells the truth in a room that was never built for him to speak. And maybe that's the most powerful kind of leadership there is. No shouting, no vengeance, just presence and truth. So if you're still watching, ask yourself this: what truths have we overlooked? What voices have we dismissed? And what would the world look like if we listened? Not to who speaks loudest, but to who speaks with purpose. Because the greatest threat to corruption is not outrage. It's exposure. Cold. Calm. Indéniable. And the greatest threat to arrogance is a quiet man with nothing to hide.